This
Uh,
conference will now be recorded.
well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so very much for being here. Just a general topic to start the morning. Our unemployment rate dropped below 8% to 7.9. That's really great. And we had 600,000 new jobs, and I think we're all just grateful for any of those jobs that are coming back because we really need them, particularly with some of the layoffs that might be on the horizon. I just want to welcome our guest presenter, Dean Oles from Centegix. Dean, our school district consists of the officers that you saw there, and here is our staff, and we're going
Sorry, Jane.
backwards, I
Trying to
guess.
keep up
That's
with
all
you.
right.
There's our
Yes,
officers.
these are our executive officers. Serving with me is Chris Patrica from Lee County, President-elect, Thomas Kennedy from Citrus as Vice President, Wendy Atkinson from Charlotte, who's our treasurer, and Tim Weschauer from Osceola, who's our immediate past president. And we want to remind everybody of the Board of Directors Leadership Development Training next Thursday, October the 8th, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and the Board of Directors meeting on Friday, October the 9th at 9 a.m. until noon. I'm so sorry that you all aren't in person with us in Sarasota. Maybe we'll try to get you all together here at a later date. But here's our wonderful association staff. Work with Andrea Messina, our executive director, and they are doing great jobs to help us facilitate many things in this new age. Our mission statement is to increase student achievement through the development of effective school board leadership and advocacy for public education. And we're always reminded of that. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn things over to Dean. Dean lives in Atlanta. And we love Atlanta, and want to get him down here to work with our districts. So, Dean, I will turn it over to you. We're really looking forward to hearing about everything that Centegix is doing with Alyssa's law legislation.
All right. Well, thank you, Jane. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, all of you, FSBA. I know you guys are busy, and I appreciate the time this morning. I'll kind of go just over a little bit of this. Before Sandy Hook in 2012, the school security really primarily focused on prevention, right? And that include access control, metal detectors, vestibules, all the things designed to keep bad people from getting into school. And don't get me wrong, many of those things are so important in a lot of the things in day-to-day activities of a school. But again, it wasn't preventing the people from getting into the school. So the leadership that I work with came to me and said, Dean, they're still getting in. These are students, they're ex-students, they're faculty or even ex-faculty, right? They know our protocols, they know how to get in the building. So what do we do? And not only that, there's also events that you just can't control anyway, right? There's still going to be medical issues, there's still going to be fights, there's going to be non-custodial parents that come into a school. How do we react to those as well? So I worked with my team and I said, how do we change that? Right? How do we more focus instead of on the prevention, but look at the response, right? And that's kind of where we really focused and went to work. How do we know sooner that something is happening? And how do we respond faster with the critical information needed? And how do you communicate with everyone so everyone knows how to take immediate action? And I say all that because Alyssa's law was really created for that same reason. And I applaud Lori. She's on the call today. Lori, I honestly, I look up to you. I appreciate everything. I'm sorry for what you had to go through to make this change happen. But the idea that you're saying, things still might happen, but I want to save a life by how we respond to something and give people the tools to respond faster is really everything that I've also been trying to work on the last 7 years of my life, because we know things will happen. And for
Dean,
those,
I'm sorry, I think Lori was getting ready to say something. Lori, did you want to say something?
No, just thank you so much. I really greatly appreciate it. And I know that Alyssa's law will help to save lives. Thank you.
Absolutely. And for those who didn't know, this is not just a Florida thing. Lori, Make Our School Safe organization, they're now pushing. New Jersey has passed legislation, is now a law. There's several other states, New York, Nebraska, and even some federal things. So this is expanding beyond Florida. And again, just applaud the work that's been done in changing really and saving lives, but just really changing how security professionals look at school security and how they can respond faster. So thank you. So I want to dig a little bit into the law for those that are either new to this or seen it for the first time. Alyssa's law, it was named after Alyssa Alladef, Lori's daughter. It's legislation that requires public schools, charter schools also in the state of Florida, to have a mobile panic alert system. And that panic system is tied directly to law enforcement. So it really cuts down on the communication and the time that responders know something is going on, where it's going on, and then how can they get there faster. And also included in that is the communication tools, right? Because there's a lot of chaos. When we look back at the Parkland and some of the other events, there's chaos. There's communication gaps between agencies. There's confusion on where things are. So this legislation is really saying, how can we streamline efforts and make sure everyone is on the same page and knows what's going on faster? So it started Make Our Schools Safe, and Lori really pushed this after the Parkland. It took effect, the governor signed it the last day of June. It took effect the first day of July this last summer during COVID. And it must be installed by the 21-22 year. So by the start of your next school year, every one of your schools will have to have the mobile panic button so that staff in that school can call directly to emergency services during an emergency. And I wanted to kind of step aside and say that's the law, right? That's the compliance of it. But there's another side of this. And I travel around and go to many school board meetings around the country. I always tend to be lucky enough to be the last agenda item after a 3-hour debate that there's a lot of other things going on.
Hey, we don't know anything about that, so.
I applaud the work you all do. I know you guys have families. I know a lot of you, this is not even your primary job, but that you're dedicated to the kids and changing that lives in the school and the learning and the safety. So thank you. As I sit in these meetings, I also realize that I'm only one topic of that day, right? And there might be 15 agenda topics. I know in that month, I'm probably one of 100. You guys make a lot of decisions. There's a lot of policy around this. And I wanted then, because of that, to say, this is not just compliance, right? This is not just another law. Sometimes when I talk to school administrators and we're doing some of the drills and the things like that, I'll say, yeah, how many drills do you do? We do two a semester. We'll do 2 a year. Well, why do you do it? Well, we do it because that's what the state law is. That's a state mandate. That's what our school board policy has set, that we have to do this many drills. And the fact is, that's not why they drill, right? They drill because that drill is going to make them better. It's going to make them more prepared, right? There is a true intent on why they do that, and it's not just to meet a law. And with that, Alyssa's law is not just complying, right? It's not just trying to stick something in there that meets the requirements. It's about looking at the intent of it, right? What Lori has worked so hard for, which is, you know what? We want people to know more, respond faster, know quicker. So we got to look at things through a little bit different perspective. And that's really what I challenge people out of this meeting, is say, how do we really meet the intent and that goal in the spirit of the law? So we're really changing lives and not just trying to check a box, right? Because sometimes it's really easy to do with all the things that go on day to day. And that kind of turns into a very high level statement. I've used this several times, Lori. I apologize. I sometimes don't give credit all the time, but time equals life, right? It's so critical. It's so important that every second, what we say at our company is every second matters, because those seconds turn into something, right? In these emergencies, those seconds matter. Those are lives. And if we can cut down on seconds, that does save lives. So looking at the law, after it was passed this summer, part of that was that the state of Florida appropriated $8 million for this panic solution to be rolled out statewide. Unfortunately, due to COVID, some of the budget shortfalls, that did get reduced a little. But I also want to stop and just say, be thankful, right? Because I know it maybe isn't all the money that got allotted, but there's a lot of states that try to do something or push something down. They know it's the right thing, but there's no funding given to it. Lori probably knows this also, that sometimes it's easy to make a promise but not deliver on it. So I applaud again even the state of Florida for really putting their money where their mouths are and making sure that there is something that can be put in place. So it's not a 100% burden on the counties and the districts, but really that they can get something that makes a difference. So this DOE then was given that money and they put out a bid. And that bid is going out looking for a vendor or vendors that kind of meet the requirements and give options to those school districts. And those districts really have a few options. They can use that solution that the DOE selected, which will be a little or no cost to the district. They can enhance that DOE solution, so use the DOE solution, but say, what else do we need that makes sense for our district, right? What else can we add to it, combine it, integrate, and partner with, so that there's a bigger solution? And in that case, you would only be responsible for the difference, right? The enhancements that you're looking at. And then there's others that you may say, you know what, it's not right for us. We need this and that. And you may just choose a completely different solution. And then again, that cost will vary. So those really will become those three options that you should look for as this continues.
Hey, Dean, I have a quick question. If the DOE issued their bid on August 31st, do you have any idea when they will select those different solution or solutions, and or B, when they will be available to districts?
Yeah, so it actually closes on the October 6th. That is when the bid officially closes. There is now a process after that. So usually in this process, I don't want to speak exactly to this process, but this will usually become they will go through and start narrowing down who their top choices are that meet the requirements. And they will start selecting and maybe do a little more due diligence on those few companies. And then at the end, award something. It's probably looking, before the end of the year, there will be an award, which I guess is kind of critical, because if you look at it, there is a short time window, right, to get this done, really between the first of the year. And I've heard from many districts and sitting through meetings that they're looking at supplemental, right? They're doing bids at the same time because of this time constraint. So they're looking at their options at the same time that the DOE is looking at theirs. So there's people doing multiple bids and just going to weigh options. And we'll kind of go through this in the next few minutes. You'll realize kind of the difference of the options and why people are looking at different things. What I'm sharing here, I don't want to make it sound, obviously there's some bias here to be fully transparent, but there's also the idea of the real world, right? Just how it applies. And again, most of this is also coming from school board members, from school district leaders, administrators.
But board members probably won't see anything in their district until the new year.
Yeah, I've seen some of this has been a topic at some of the board. It may have been at some the people in this call. They may have already had topics about this, kind of watching for it. As far as a solution, I do not probably see it. If it's going to be this year, it's going to probably be at the end of the year that they will say, hey, this is the selection that the DOE made, and here's our options at this point.
Okay, I just want them to kind of know when it should be on their radar. Thank you.
No problem. So looking at some of the things that you're going to see, there's really two main ways of doing this. The first one is with a phone-based app that is given out, and we'll kind of go. So it'd be on staff members' iPhones or their Android phones. And the other is a wearable, and that can either complement a phone app or it can be a standalone that doesn't require a phone app. So I'm going to kind of dig a little bit deeper on those two to kind of explain the differences. So as you guys move forward, you can ask these questions or understand. The first being the phone solutions. There's some advantages. Phone solutions are less expensive overall, right, to a district, to the state, and they're faster to deploy. So you can move through faster, you push it out. But I kind of put a little asterisk next to deploy because there's also a con to that. right? Which it might be faster to push out, but is it really being adopted? Is it being downloaded? There's a little bit of conversation before this call started and talking about the differences in Florida and the unions. This has been a big union pushback just because when you're requiring staff members to download something onto their personal phones, are you going to pay, right? Is the district going to start paying for that phone? How do they push that? They can't 100% mandate it. So there's some concerns there that the districts have. Obviously, a phone must be on you at all times and has to be charged for it to be effective. Also, you have the locating. Just imagine you're in the middle of an emergency and you got to go, okay, I got to get my phone. I'm going to unlock it. I'm going to open it. I've got to remember what was the name of that app that the district purchased. You open it and you hit a button. There's just some constraints there, especially in the middle of a crisis. And even if you can do all that, is there coverage issues? We have all walked schools, and we all know that sometimes cell phone reception is not the best. And then we hear, well, there's Wi-Fi, right? There's very good Wi-Fi in the schools, and I agree. The concern with that, though, is a lot of staff members aren't always connected to the Wi-Fi for various reasons. So that doesn't 100% fix that issue. And when an alert is initiated, do you know where you're going? Outside, it works really good with GPS when location is turned on. As you get inside, that gets more difficult. You don't know necessarily what floor someone is on or what room they're in, what part of the building. And that, again, going back to that time equals life, the faster you can get to someone by knowing where they are, that can change the outcome. So, keeping those in mind. When we look at the other side, the wearables, this is now not a phone app that every staff member has to download. This is instead think of it like a smart badge, a pendant that you would give to every staff member, and a card or badge. And that device now has a button on it, right? That you can click a button and help comes. The pros to that is it can be given to every employee without, again, requiring them to download something. So a lot more equitable without some of the pushback you get on a personal phone device. It's easier to activate because it's accessible. If it's around your neck, if it's clipped onto you, it's something that you always have on you and you don't have to get to it. It doesn't rely, most of the solutions do not rely on the cellular or Wi-Fi network. It's usually its own network. So that coverage can go further. It can go to those stairwells, that lower floor, hey, Florida, they build these schools really good for hurricanes, which is really bad for reception, unfortunately. So usually those technologies try to penetrate further, but then also they usually focus on that floor, what floor is it, and what area, even what room is the event happening. The cons, there's obviously cons to this as well. They're more expensive, right? Traditionally, they're more expensive because there's more devices. It can take longer to deploy. So, Andrea, when you mentioned earlier, there's some planning that has to be done here. If you think that this is a better option for the district, you want to make sure you're planning ahead as well. It can go through, these can take a day to install in each school because there is some installation on site. So things to think about, pros and cons. I'm going to stop for a minute, Andrea, if people have some questions on that.
Yeah, there's a few questions. First off is, will students, if a district were to choose the app, for example, would students have access to that app? Do you know?
I have personally never seen that anywhere in the country. Not saying it can't happen. Colleges, that's more popular, that they will give access to students to initiate something from an app. I have not yet seen it in K-12. Technically, there's no reason it couldn't happen. I think it really becomes more of a policy of why it hasn't happened, putting this device, maybe some of the accidental activations, things like that. Something you can definitely talk through with your legal, your administrators to see, is that something right for doing with students?
Okay, and then do you know, and you may not have the answer to this, but do you know what Florida public records and record retaining issues might we have for putting the app on personal phones?
Great question. I've seen it asked before. I'm not going to say I have the legal answer for that.
Okay, I'll talk with our Florida legal advisors on that specific question, because that will help to make a decision, or it will help to inform board members when they make their decisions. If there's a onus here, they have to plan for that retention and that sort of stuff as well, and it may weigh into their decision. And then another question is, if there is this wearable solution, how does that provide better geolocation versus the phone?
So the phone, obviously GPS, people are very familiar with it now when you're trying to get around traffic. The GPS works really good outdoors, but indoors does have trouble. So usually you just see a little bigger bubble, or especially floors, it doesn't know what floor you're on. So a lot of the other systems in the wearables will start to use devices in a school for locating. And it kind of creates a more accurate, by having devices around a school, it becomes indoor positioning. So you're almost building kind of a separate little, I want to say GPS, but it's not GPS. So you're kind of creating a little network. So you do have that indoor positioning that's on a separate network.
Okay. And then what happens if there's a power outage or the network is down with systems like the wearables or other either network and software platforms?
So this will kind of be solution specific. Most solutions that are looking at a wearable will have a battery backup and different options to make sure that that communication gets through if a power outage happens, or even if a network outage happens too. So those two things are usually looked at and solved by most of those. It's something you probably just want to work with the leadership and say, again, make sure it stands up to the real world rigors.
Okay, and then Lori actually suggests to me, Lori sent me a message, and she's saying she doesn't believe that the apps will be on student phones. So just that's a context I wanted to share with everyone. Is there enough funding in the FLDOE bid to provide, for example, the wearable solution to every school in Florida?
So this will kind of depend on what solutions come out through it. I know there's a possibility that there will be some with a wearable in this budget. Some have taken a more base level. There's some things you can add. I think, again, without knowing really all the respondents that happened to this bid, we'll see the solution. This is, again, where I also ask, just start investigating also outside. Anyone that's responding to the DOE bid can definitely talk to your district as well and give you the same options, pricing options. So you're not waiting the next 2 or 3 months to get a decision. You can at least start to know, hey, what are the options available to me? And then see how that matches up and correlates with what the DOE is doing.
Okay, and then Sam actually asks, isn't Canvas already on personal phones? And I would say we don't have Canvas in every district, and in some cases it might be, but I will say that regarding personal phones, I do think boards should start now looking maybe at their policy of personal phone use for staff members. I know that in some districts, like you mentioned, the union really does have a strong position on this. If you're going to require me to put it on my phone, then I'm going to ask you to pay me to put it on my phone, to which I personally say, well, or I could allow you to actually use your phone during the day like you already are when you shouldn't be. So, there are ways you can have the conversation, but you really need to look at your policy on personal phone use during the school day by staff members, so that whatever you decide, your policy may or may not already allow for it. You may have to adjust policy, that sort of thing. And Dean, another question just came in on the wearable device itself. Is there a concern about accidental pressing of the panic button? And can you share more about what the wearable type looks like? And as you're answering that question, I'm reminded about my mother who lives with me. I think most of you know that. And she has a wearable device around her neck all the time. For us, it's, one company. I know there are other companies, but it really is like a little square about the size of what used to be a pager or an old garage door opener that kind of hangs on a lanyard is what my mom has. So I'm asking, how does that fit in with, I realize you have one solution, but there are other companies and they're all pretty similar, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to hold one up and I'm going to turn it away because I'm not here to promote. This is really about the ideas of solutions, not a specific solution. But if you can see me on camera, I am holding one of those devices. This is a ID sized card that has a button on it. There is, like you mentioned, Andrea, there is more pennant style. That is more if you've seen, assisted living or, maybe your parents, that they can press and go. So there's more of that pennant style. There's going to be different styles. Some of it is all about, again, the staff. Some of them need to be charged more often, and some of them don't have to be charged at all. It can last 5 or 7 years. So there's different options that you just want to make sure you're looking at. Regarding the accidental protection, I will say, again, this is something I've been involved in the development side, and it kind of surprised me because what you think you can develop in a lab with a bunch of developers, and you give it to 10 people and we're testing it, and then you give it to 100 people in a school, and you're going, wait, how did you do that? And then you start giving it to thousands of people, and like now we have hundreds of thousands of people wearing our device, and it's a learning process. So we have done everything we can between the physical design, even the clicking. It's not a single click, so to prevent those accidental clicks, it's a 3-click for us. That cuts down so we don't have those accidental things. So again, a learning process, which also follows when you're in a panic, you tend to click. So absolutely great question, something we do, and that's really about individual product design and process design of each manufacturer you're looking at.
And when you held up that ID one, I'm curious because I know most districts require staff members to wear an ID, and in some districts you might see 2 or 3 kind of cards hanging there. It would just be one of those cards hanging there right with the ID. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's correct. It can fit behind the staff ID. Usually we don't want to replace the ID just because the ID for a lot of districts is also your access control. That same one that says, hey, this is me, I'm a staff member. So this really just fits behind it, doesn't replace the access control, and it now becomes a way to activate and be on you at all times. But it also fits good with what a lot of the new security protocols are, which is they want every staff member to be wearing an ID. And by wearing an ID, you can start to say, hey, if you don't have an ID, let's escort you to the office to make sure you get checked in and you should be on campus.
Got it. And I just wanted to mention back again to my mother, because like I said, she has something that hangs around her neck. And for her, obviously I'm very concerned about the accidental pressing of the button as well, but hers is you actually have to kind of hold the button in for a while. It's not just a press, it's a hold. And so there are ways, and each company kind of has their own, I don't want to call it protocol, but however that works with their device.
Yeah, and I think this is, again, reach out to the companies, if it's us, if it's someone else, and just, you can even just get samples of these devices so you guys can share it, look at it, press it. We had to figure out a way to get vibration into a thin device, right? Because what we realized is we need to tell someone, stop clicking once you've activated, right? How do we know that? We got to give feedback back to that staff member that they did what they needed to do. Help is coming, right? So we had to include a vibration, so it was a silent, discreet way to give feedback. I do see a question, Andrea, people asking about the 6 or 8. We only train 2 things for us, which is you press 3 times if you need help. When it vibrates, help's coming. That's it. And they might press 4 or 5, it doesn't matter. The other thing we say though, and I don't want to get really into this because it's not the purpose here, but some of the systems have the ability then to say, I want to put a school into lockdown, so they can just keep clicking. So even for us, we really only have you press it 3 times for help, or if it is an active shooter, you just keep clicking until you're in a lockdown. So it's, again, get these devices, ask the manufacturers, the vendors, ask them for these devices, play with it, ask them questions. There's usually an answer. There's a reason why they do the things they do based upon a lot of experience with a lot of schools using the product. But then also remember, this is not just teachers, right? In Parkland, it wasn't necessarily teachers that saw the shooter and weren't the first to respond. So making sure that every staff member, this can go from custodial to cafeteria to people outside that help on lunch hour, right? Make sure every person has the ability to call for help, because that might be the person that sees something first and can really make an impact.
All right, that's all for now. We can keep going.
All right, so when we look at then, I want to kind of mention a few other things to consider. This isn't necessarily part of it, but when we're talking about safety, right, is there's other options, add-ons. I kind of talked about the enhancements and add-ons. Look at other issues, really say, where are our gaps right now? There was a few gaps in Parkland. Obviously, there was, you know, the things that Lori could probably go into a lot, but there is no good way to communicate with everyone. So even if you have an app solution that now goes to teachers, what if you're not near a teacher with an app? What if you're a student in the bathroom or somewhere else? So, you know, look, some solutions have visual strobes, just like a fire alarm, right? When a fire alarm goes off, none of us need to look at a document to know what to do, right? It's ingrained in us. We have to have the same for every other type of active shooter, weather, things like that. It just has to be ingrained in us, so there's no thought during a crisis. So make sure, is there ways to visually communicate with people? That also helps on the ADA side, but then also automated intercom announcements. So you look at it to make an announcement. Now, Parkland, and again, I want to just look at this, Parkland had a fire alarm go off, and it really created a lot of chaos and added to that event, because a lot of people thought that the shooter pulled the fire alarm. That is not true. It was actually the gun that set off the fire alarm, which really says any event like that moving forward could also have a fire alarm. Once a fire alarm is engaged, it is blaring very loud. You cannot hear the intercom. So what other elements do you have? Again, intercom, visual. You have to have very redundant and multi-path ways that you can communicate with everyone, because one of those may not be accessible during a crisis. And then also look at the day-to-day, because there are solutions out there that really focus on the active shooter, and you know, it's emotional. It 100% is emotional, but then we don't want to sell on fear, right? Because there is two ways you can look at designing this, right? And that is the ROI, even from a day-to-day usage, becomes the fights, the medical issues, the weather, the things that do happen. We all hope an active shooter never happens again, right? But there are going to be things, the fights, the medical, that do happen every day. How do you respond to that? Can you use the same solution for those type of incidents as well? And that's going to be very critical to make sure, again, that you're getting the use out of it. But when you do use it for the everyday emergencies, it means you're also comfortable using it during the biggest emergency. Because if it's just something that's been, you know, on your phone or that you're wearing, and the first time you need to use it is 5 years down the road when you see a shooter, there's going to be some confusion, right? So we want to make sure if it's something you're using more often, it's around you, you know when to use it, how to use it. That means you're going to be much more equipped and prepared if you do see that bigger event. So lastly, you know, I just want to kind of say, how can you help? People have asked that. I think the biggest thing is just talk with district leadership, right? Obviously, you have empowered them to make these decisions, but then let them know. One of the biggest things as we talk, especially in security budgets for so long were officers and police cars. And that's what it was. It has changed in the last few years, that now they're looking at handling the cameras and everything else involved. But also with that is sometimes security people aren't used to seeing the big budgets that school boards and superintendents see. So they're sometimes afraid to bring solutions that they think is going to be best for their district, because they're afraid of, wow, that's a lot of money. So empower them to say, hey, go out and find what you think is best, bring it to us, bring the options to us, let us look at it and let's talk through it. Don't let them think, hey, I got to find the cheapest solution, but find the thing that really, again, meets the intent, that's going to stand up to the real world. That's an important part of it. Also, take an active interest. Again, we talk about the timeline that you're going to start seeing this. Maybe you've already started talking about this. There's going to be hundreds of things. This is important. Okay, this is one that truly will save lives. It will change. Talk about it. Be interested in it. Ask the questions. It's okay to ask questions, because again, you would much rather know ahead of time that, hey, we should think about that, then find out after we should have thought about that, right? So again, be proactive in that. And again, when a solution is proposed and brought forward to you, look at it through, hey, will it do this? What if someone asked about power outage? Ask those questions again, because now's your opportunity without it costing a life. Later, it may cost a life, and we don't want any more lost lives. So that's kind of, the end.
No, I was just gonna say we have a few more questions, so don't think you're done. Are you ready?
Yeah, so in my closing, at least I wanted to say, obviously, again, look at the intent, look at why Alyssa's law is in place. It is really about how can we make sure that in that emergency, in any emergency, that help can happen faster, that law enforcement knows where they know to respond to. Make sure you're satisfying the intent and the goal, not just the law.
Well, you've been very, very informative today, and I really appreciate it. Like I said, we have some more questions, and I suspect we'll get some more. I do want to remind board members what you just said about intent of the law versus compliance is something that we at the School Boards Association emphasize to school board members over and over and over again, not just in this school safety arena. It's true for sure in the Sunshine Law. In fact, it's written into the law that it is about intent, not just compliance. But even things like equity and all sorts of other things, as a general rule, as board members, you want to not just comply with laws and requirements, but you actually want to be leaders and ensure that the intent is embraced. One question that came up has to do with a wearable, and what if somebody has a wearable on, but they are off campus, but they're in an emergency situation, let's say, I don't know, at home or in a grocery store or whatever, and they start pushing what they happen to have wearing. What would happen to the school?
So I think this is a training opportunity. We get asked the same question, but through a different optic, which is, what if I leave the campus and someone pushes, like my daughter is in my purse and starts pushing the button, right? So we purposely, I know other solutions as well, try to say when you leave the campus, it stops working. And that's important because on the flip side, sometimes like phones and things like that, it will keep tracking, it will keep working. It can create maybe the false activations off-site, or it adds to that when you talk about equity, Andrea, right? It adds to that worry between unions and staff members going, man, are they tracking me everywhere? Really look at a solution, if it's app, if it's a wearable that says, it's going to work on site, but not after, regarding the question of you have to train them, say this is a on-campus tool, right? When you get off campus, it's obviously not going to work. That's going to be a training.
So it sort of has a built-in geo-fencing mechanism of sorts.
That's correct. And you're going to find that is going to be a plus, really, as you start talking between the public, your staff, all the employees, because they're going to want to know that this stops when they leave a campus. But then again, look at different things. You want to make sure it works when they pull onto campus, and that's outside, that's inside, anywhere inside, anywhere outside.
And I also see a question that I'm going to try to answer, because Dean, I'm not sure if you have the ability to answer this, but the question is, will the DOE look at patents, potential infringements, and litigation? And I personally am going to say they ought to. That doesn't mean they will, but I will certainly send that exact question over to some of our contacts at DOE and see if that's built into their review process of the bids. Dean, do you know anything different about that?
Yeah, and again, when you're looking at options and manufacturers and different vendors, make sure there's an indemnity clause, right? You want to make sure that, and this should be a standard part of the contracts, that they are really indemnifying you if there is ever an action taken against them, and that they will cover you. Most of the companies, stand behind their products, and they are going to indemnify you and cover you in case something like that were to ever happen, right or wrong.
So this is going to be an important conversation that school districts are going to be having in the next 6 months, and that's one reason we wanted to bring this to your attention. As I mentioned earlier, we did record this, so if you want to have any of your peers on the board listen to this before your conversation, you can reference it, you can get the link from us. Does anybody have any other questions? Jane, how about you? Do you have any final comments before we go?
Well, I would just say to Dean, thank you. That was an excellent presentation, and it gave me a lot of questions to go over with staff at this time. And I think that's the important thing for us to do. We are, not micromanagers. We don't run the school district. Our superintendent does, but our chief operating officer, whoever's in charge of security, I have a bit of a background in that, and have been very interested in this topic for a long time. So I think this is the time for us to formulate plans so that we know what our options are and that we have things covered, both with the union as well as with our staff, so that we can keep everyone safe, which ultimately is what we are looking to do, is to make sure that our students are safe and secure so that they can learn and do their very best. But thank you, Dean, and enjoy meeting you, and thanks for your support at FSBA. We really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Okay. Any other final comments?
I have a quick question. Can you
Go
hear
ahead.
me? Okay.
Yeah. Is that you, Jory?
Yes, Jory.
Hey, Jory.
With the technology that you're talking about, if the wearable badge stops when you leave campus, what would be the possibility of the technology out there jamming a signal that would prevent the badges from working on campus?
Yep, great question. And again, this is going to be a vendor specific, a solution specific thing. Great question to ask them, right? What have you done to make sure that that doesn't happen? Because unfortunately, these people, when they're looking to do harm, they're trying to think through all the scenarios so they can be the next biggest one. And that's unfortunate. But they're going to take more planning, right? They're spending months looking at this. We need to spend months or years looking at the opposite side of it, right? So ask those solutions that you're looking at, ask them, how do you make sure that this doesn't happen? What technologies are you using? What encryption? There's different frequencies to make sure that jammers aren't available. There's a lot to that question. I think it's just something you got to make sure you're asking the solutions you're looking at.
Thank you.
And I also want to tell everyone that we will have the link to this webinar in next week's Wednesday newsletter, so that you can either forward it to others if you choose or have it for yourself, however you want to do that. We also always have it archived, but I've gotten some private messages in the chat asking about access to this recording. So just want to let you know, I'll make sure that it is in next week's newsletter. All right, final thoughts by anyone? Dean, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Like Jane said, it really does help us kind of know the questions we need to ask and some of the things that we need to think through. Jane?
Well, I just want to say thank you again, and thanks to all our members for being with us this week. I look forward to meeting or seeing you all next Thursday and Friday. And with that, I will say have a wonderful weekend. Dean, thank you again.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.